Good morning, everyone. Good morning, colleagues, students, and friends joining us here and online. On behalf of the Faculty of Learning Science and Education at Thammasat University, I warmly welcome you to this open forum on revelations and reflections on queer aging insights from Thailand and the Philippines. Today is not only an academic event, it is a space for listening, a space for recognition, and a space for learning together. We often speak about aging in numbers. We discussed policies, health systems, and demographics. But aging is also personal. It is social. It is shaped by culture, by relationship, and by power. For queer communities, aging carries unique experiences. There are stories of resilience. There are stories of invisibility. There are chosen family. There are moments of struggle, and there is also strength. In Southeast Asia, conversation about aging are growing, but conversation about queer aging are still quite limited. That is why today matters. Bringing Thailand and the Philippines into dialogue helps us see both similarities and differences. It helps us learn across contexts. And it reminds us that dignity must extend across identity and across the life course. At our faculty, we believe learning goes beyond the classroom. Learning happens when research meets lived experience. Learning happens when marginalized voices are heard. Learning happens when we create brave spaces for honest conversation. This forum reflects our commitment to social equity in education, health, and community life. It also reflects our belief that universities must help shape a more inclusive society. I would like to thank our distinguished speakers for sharing their scholarship and insights. Your work expands our belief that our understanding and opens new possibility for policy, practice, and care. I also thank our research unit organizer, faculty members, and students who made this event possible. As we begin, I invite all of us to listen with openness, to ask thoughtful questions, and to reflect on what this means for our work and our communities. May today's conversation continue beyond this room. Thank you, and I wish us all a meaningful and inspiring forum. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Dean Addison, distinguished speaker, and also colleagues from the Faculty of Learning, Science, and Education, and also ladies and gentlemen, both online and on-site. So, on behalf of the research unit at the Thammasat University, it is a great pleasure to be here to welcome you all to the seminar. Revelations and reflections on queer aging insight from Thailand and the Philippines. So, as Dean Addison just mentioned, many countries worldwide becoming an aging society right now, and also they face with many challenges, especially among those LGBT and queer communities. So, these challenges impact their health and well-being, and also the quality of life. So learning and sharing experience about queer and LGBT communities is a critical issue that we have to learn, and especially sharing between Thailand and the Philippines will give you the insightful to see what they need, and we can respond to them appropriately. So thank you to Dean Addison and the faculty to hosting this wonderful event. And thank you everyone to join us today. So the LGBT research unit at Thammasat University as a partner of your faculty, since we are the same family, and also we are the partner and allies of LGBT communities. I hope you learn and share your experience today and enjoy all sessions of this seminar. Have a nice day. Thank you.
Okay, so we'll take a photo first, right? Okay, and present the gift. Okay, so for all of you who are watching this at home, you may be wondering about some practicalities. So we will run today until almost 12 noon. And at the end of the second presentation, you will have QR codes to evaluate the event and to claim your participation certificate, which we will then email to you as well. We will start with the first presentation by Assistant Professor Monique M. Muyagas from the College of Arts and Sciences, University of the Philippines, Visayas. And the presentation is titled Stories of Queer Reflexivity, Contextualizing the Filipino Queer Aging Experience. So if you are watching this at home, you have any questions, comments, you can leave them in the live stream, and we will also have a Q&A session here at the end of both presentations. Go ahead. You have about 45 minutes.
Thank you for taking the time to be with us today. It is an honor to have been accommodated in your day. I would like to thank Professor Timo Yanen for obliging me with this opportunity to share my project. To the esteemed faculty of the Learning Sciences and Education, and to the Dean and the head of the Research Unit in Health, Educational and Social Equality and Sexual and Gender Diversity, I'm grateful that you have accommodated me into your beautiful institution. To the students, faculty, staff, and those viewing virtually, thank you for being with us in this forum. Before I begin, I wish to honor the ancestors and indigenous peoples of this land, whose stewardship of lands, culture, and community continues to this day. I also recognize the generations before us who have fought for dignity, equality, and inclusion, and whose struggles make studies like this possible. I take space and make time to honor those who have passed and have not been able to see their contributions to this work. This morning, I aim to incite critical reflections and conversations with my discussion on stories of queer reflexivity through the life course that contextualizes the Filipino queer aging experience. I begin with my view from somewhere. I am different, I am queer, I am other. Every waking hour as a queer person is a confluence of identity and subjectivity negotiation, navigation, management, and positioning. For everyone else, they take the straight, the binary, the dimorphism as easy on the mind, a heuristic convenience. I am different, I am queer, I am other. A constant, incessant voice in my head where I, a queer Filipino cis woman, growing up and growing old in a post-colonial Philippines, recognize and interrogate my queerness. This queer reflexivity is present. I am different, I am queer, I am other. I have also come to realize I was aging. It was inevitable. How am I to understand my queer aging experience? I do acknowledge my privilege. I am a queer cis woman, academic activist with access to resources and my queer community. My queerness is situated in a privileged time and context. Given these, I made my research project intentional and purposeful. My presentation this morning is but a feature from a larger project on the critical phenomenology of aging in older queer Filipinos that commenced in 2023 and was completed in 2024. My project was situated in Western Visayas, and contributions were from 12 older queer participants aged 55 years old and older. Since the completion of the project, I have lost 4 of them. Why aging? Why Filipino queer aging? I recast my initial musings. How am I to understand the queer aging experience? I aim to engage this conversation. So I am an aging queer cis woman having an existential crisis. So I sought refuge in scholarship. I could not find resonance. Nothing spoke to who I am and my aging queer identity. There are but a handful and even dated queer aging studies in the Philippines. Indeed, aging is universal. Aging is a universal human condition, but the human experience is very complex. Universality renders me and my queer community invisible, decentered, erased because of cis heteronormative default of aging. Furthermore, queer aging is weird. That means Western, educated, industrialized, rich, democratic, quote unquote, global north. Finally, interrogations into aging are often nestled within a narrow, uncritical theorizing and methodologies. These unsettling and disconcertedness, I felt, led me to reflect who must be phenomenologically accounted for in the lived experience of aging. How do conceptualizations about the aging experience, such as queer reflexivity across the life course, bring to fore the older queer Filipino aging experience? This brings us to interrogate the phenomenon of queer reflexivity. This concept must not be misconstrued with that of James MacDonald in 2016 about queer reflexivity. MacDonald posited that queer researchers engage in queer reflexivity during their fieldwork. Queer researchers experience being reflexive about negotiating the closet by revealing and concealing multiple aspects of ourselves to others in the field, the categories we use to identify ourselves and others, the ways in which researchers construct non-normative identities in the field, and aspects of ourselves that change in the field through interactions with others. However, in the narratives of my participants, they have described queer reflexivity as a self-awareness of queerness that emerges through the recognition of social structures that define difference. It reveals both internal self-interrogation and the external societal forces that shape perceptions of queerness. This is an introspective process of acknowledging or denying, loving or hating, validating or delegitimizing my difference with a cis heteronormative ecosystem. Hypervigilance, concealment, anticipated stigma and discrimination, expectations of rejection, stealthing, queer identity management, heteroperformativity, internalized homophobia, relational stressors, anticipation of, if not already lived, moral injury, and a plethora of fear and anxieties. It is both a process of reflection and an outcome of recognizing one's queerness in a predominantly heteronormative world. Queer reflexivity is the self-awareness of difference, where queer individuals recognize and interrogate their queerness. This awareness can occur at various stages, from childhood to adulthood, shaped by sociocultural norms and gender and non-heteronormativity. Queer reflexivity reveals both internal self-interrogation and external societal forces that shape perceptions of queerness. It is both a process of reflection and an outcome of recognizing one's queerness in a predominantly heteronormative world. Jonah, 68 years old, cis woman lesbian who is visually impaired. Her self-awareness and realization of her queer sexuality became the critical point of her succeeding life trajectories. As Jonah becomes more self-aware, her orientation is called to self-reflection. This awareness is crucial to the consciousness of being different, which situates the self as inhabiting an orientation non-conforming of prevailing notions of heterosexuality, being queer. Jonah's queer being for itself disrupts heteronormativity. Jonah's account describes the beginning of cues that recognize the reflection of difference. Being different, being queer, is embodied and felt by Jonah. Jonah's queer reflexivity articulates how her sense of self accounts for the gendered expectations of performativity and expression. She explained that her way of presenting herself through clothing, demeanor, and attractions describe her subjective understanding of her gender based on the prevailing gendered binary expectations. This self-reflection reveals how the young Jonah was already self-aware of her difference relative to the gendered expectations. Jules, 71-year-old cisgender gay man, shared a similar narrative of reflecting on his queerness while in middle school. His reflection of his queer self is situated within heteronormative gender norms that create this understanding of difference or queerness. Jules shares how he reflects on the difference against the backdrop of heteronormative expectations of attraction. He also expressed how masculine expectations of performativity elicited a feeling of embarrassment. A cisgender gay man, is another illustration of queer reflexivity, who characterized this as an initial tentativeness to recognize his own queer self and the discomfort of being called out for that difference. He realized that this difference is recognizable, and in that incident he felt embarrassed. He was called out, revealed, or outed. A reflected that his difference has become obvious. His feminine-like behaviors were recognized by other queer people. This was quite disconcerting for A, who disliked expressions of hyperfemininity such as wearing makeup or cross-dressing, which are obvious markers of queerness, of difference for a man. Although the incident seems to depict older feminine gay men encouraging him to fully become his queer self at that moment, A was still coming to terms with his own queer self. An untimely, premature, and unsolicited revealing of the self by others, by other queer people or otherwise, did not come across as encouraging to A, but a situated queer self whose safety and own process of queer subjectivity has been compromised. For A, recalling the incident of feeling embarrassed and disconcerted reveals how queer reflexivity brings the self into the reality of queer subjectivities living in the hegemony of heteronormativity and difference knowing. Queer reflexivity is being queer aware, an interrogation of one's queerness. A explains how he struggled with his awareness of difference and described a queer resistance experienced as an identity crisis. Queer reflexivity is a tool for survival, a heavy mental tool constantly in the use to help navigate a world who is ready to scream at them. Apologies if I pronounce this incorrectly. Fitfet, Teo, Tut, sinner, abnormal, waste, abomination, deviant, sick, disgusting. Queer reflexivity becomes part of their being. Being queer is felt, thought, and embodied their entire life course until their aging years. A and his queer reflexivity, here we sense the internal resistance of A who tried to temper his queer authentic self because this puts his family in a precarious situation within a larger community. For A, queer self-regulation was an experience that helped him cope with the stigma and homophobia surrounding their family. His queer reflexivity is characterized as a process of knowing, showing, and hiding an awareness, a reflection of how the queer self must relate to others. As A described how his queerness has become his own source of threat to his family's safety and his own difficulty of disappointing them, disappointing his mother, disappointing his brothers. Queer reflexivity is imbued with stories that are characterized by traversing concerns of recognizing and interrogating the queer subjectivity across the network of heteronormative and homophobic forced relations in their immediate communities. This is also a process of continuous queer self-regulation as they become into being their queer authentic selves, managing contradictions and tensions across their lifetimes, thinking and reflecting whilst situated in their sociocultural context. As participants became aware of their queer subjectivities, thinking about oneself as different, this brings the self to acknowledge tensions that this difference brings in relation to their social and cultural contexts. In coming to terms with this difference, their coexistence with others, such as family or friends, their queer reflexivity describes reflections that constitute experiences of accommodation. Accommodation describes narratives of how participants' queerness or subjective difference is experienced in relation to others, particularly interpersonal relations with family members. Accommodation reveals a duality of relational function. The queer self is accommodated within the Filipino family under certain conditions, and on the other, the queer subjectivity accommodates the family's conditions for accommodating queerness. These conditions constitute the taboo of unspoken rules surrounding queer sexuality in Filipino culture. These conditions range from being discreetly queer, muting or stealthing queer performativity and expressions, not openly coming out to family, and not overtly engaging in queer attractions. This is described as a form of conditional acceptance of queerness. Hence, accommodation illustrates the navigating of sexuality as taboo within the Filipino context and culture. Sex and/or sexuality is not openly discussed in the Filipino family context. It is considered an inappropriate topic within family conversations, even more so where non-heterosexual sexualities are concerned. The sociocultural assumption of heterosexuality is the assumed default, and deviation from this is not present within the Filipino family discourse and dynamics. The prevailing Catholic ideology has maintained this through forces of silencing, shaming, and refusing any form of sex or sexuality talk within private, example family, or public or government spheres. Jonah, for instance, the contemporary concept of quote-unquote coming out was never part of Jonah's subjective queer experience. In such case, Jonah's subjective experience only assumes acceptance of her queer identity by her family from their lack of acknowledgement, discussion, opposition, or discouragement or disagreement about her sexuality. As she became an adult, she was able to maintain this assumption of acceptance by passing jokes or comments, quote-unquote, affirming her masculinity and queer attractions or relationships. She interpreted them as her family's way of expressing validation and acceptance of her queer identity. Jonah also shared her ways of self-regulating her queerness by hiding her queer relationships from her family or engaging in these relationships far from the noticing eyes of family members. For Jonah, this experience of accommodation in reference to the authority of the family matriarch has allowed for her to manage her queerness by not disclosing or discussing any of her queer relationships with family members. When a romantic partner visits her at home, it is under the premise that they are friends, or they keep to themselves in the privacy of her room. The nature of their relationship is not openly discussed or inquired about by the family. Throughout her adult life, Jonah has only engaged in queer relationships and cohabitation far from her family or their hometown. Jonah's queer reflexivity, recognizing how she disrupts the prevailing heteronormative prescriptions. Awareness of this difference that connotes disruption brings into conscious subjectivity that sexuality is a taboo family topic. This facilitates efforts to manage her queerness, which produces and is produced by accommodation. Consequently, the sexuality taboo alludes to an unspoken rule. So long as you are discreet, don't say gay, the family will accept and support her. Jules shares a similar story of accommodation when he recalled his experience about being queer aware in relation to his family. Jules explains his difference against gendered assumptions of performativity, expression, toys, and play. This self-awareness of being queer also accounts for whether there is a need to disclose or discuss with his parents or the family about his non-heteronormative actions. There is an assumption of acceptance affirmed by the lack of outright disagreement or disapproval of his queerness. The absence of disapproval from significant others is a sign of acceptance. Accommodation connotes at least a level of tolerance, a conditional or partial acceptance of the queer and difference within the Filipino family dynamic unless expressed otherwise. The non-confrontational characteristic of accommodation facilitates continuous queer reflexivity where participants are aware of their queer subjectivities in relation to others. Accommodation also describes a fragile freedom to be with their queer selves. It is their conditional accommodation where the queer person silences or mutes their queerness, particularly around family. These early stories describe reflections of difference that reveal subjective thoughts on threats of dissension, rejection, fears of dissension, rejection, or reflecting on the experience of actual dissension, rejection. Reflections about the self being different or queer recognizes the possibility of being rejected, causing conflict to interpersonal strain within the family or significant others. Dissension rejection, either real or imagined, is present in the experience of queer reflexivity. Dissension rejection also accounts for a dual relational function. The queer self is dissented rejected by the family, while the queer self dissented rejected the heteronormative prescriptions of subjectivity by the family and society. Dissension rejection is not described as a binary but a spectrum of disagreement, unsuitability, repudiation, or ostracization. Matthew, 63 years old, cis gay man, recalled how he first felt his queerness. I asked Matthew why he kept his awareness of his queerness to himself. He says he was always hiding it from his family. Nobody else knew about his queer self. While he reflects on his queer feelings of attractions and queer play, Matthew accounts for the conservative social context his queer subjectivity is situated. He was afraid others would know about him being queer because he lived in a conservative town. Hiding his queer self was his response to his thoughts of how his difference is not accommodated because of conservative views of non-heterosexuality. Matthew, as he was reflecting on his queer self, found it difficult to open himself to his family because he felt that he was not accepted. He attempted suicide when he was in middle school. He was not at a loss on how to talk to his family while being consumed with fears of being rejected and kicked out of their home if his aunt knew of his being queer. Unfortunately, his expectations of dissension, rejection, and his queerness were confirmed by his aunt's disapproval. JR, 57 years old, cisgender gay man, explained the realness of rejection in relation to his queer sexuality when he came out to his mother. JR explains this rejection of his queer sexuality as a reaction to being non-normative that transgresses the acceptable. He reflects on this repudiation as his being not normal. Notable as well is how queerness can be converted into the normal and accepted sexuality through the religious and its rituals. JR, despite being aware of this subjective contradiction, finds queerness as comfortable for him. Rejection of his queer self has also led to a more harmful outcome despite coming to terms with his queerness. JR recounts when his father found out he is queer 2 years after coming out to his mom, JR suffered most extreme form of dissension rejection from his father by being beaten for being queer. JR's recollection of dissension rejection is fueled by powerful and rigid notions of heteronormativity and gender binaries. Dissension rejection expressed by the family against being different or queer subjectivities is both a materialization and revelation of being deeply rooted sociocultural norms of heteronormativity linked to the Catholic ideology embedded within the Filipino culture. The self-consciousness of the queer self is what characterizes queer reflexivity. Accommodation and dissension rejection of the queer identity, real or imagined, underscores the dilemmas, tensions, and contradictions experienced while reflecting on the subjective difference, the awareness of being queer. Accommodation and dissension rejection reveals a duality of reflexivity. My participants' accommodation of family norms surrounding queer sexualities and their own families, accommodating their queerness, whilst my participants' own dissension rejection of family norms about queerness and their families, dissenting against or rejecting them. The emerging thematic storyline of queer reflexivity among participants' accrued narratives indicates a process of becoming different, queer in relation to others. Queer reflexivity highlights the process and outcome of how being queer or different brings their subjectivity to actual feared or threatened violence within the spheres of accommodation and dissension rejection. The queer reflexivity brings diverse ways of awareness of one's queer subjectivity that is intersubjective, queer self that reflects on how it becomes accommodated or dissented rejected by the external world. None of the participants shared stories of family being open, expressing outright acceptance, and celebrating their queer identities. Hence, giving credence to their shared narratives of process and outcomes of queer reflexivity. Stories of queer reflexivity with narratives depicting accommodation and dissension rejection trace queer subjectivity's internal and external worlds. Queer reflexivity and queer aging. Why do we need to recognize and understand the significance of queer reflexivity stories? These are critical insights into how older queer people experience and make meaning of their aging. Stories of queer reflexivity demonstrate how being queer aware is a subjective consciousness that exists in one's entire life course. You navigate the world using queer reflexivity to engage, relate, survive cis-heteronormative systems and structures. My participants' emerging themes of lived experiences of aging reveal a solitary queer aging. Despite being surrounded by people, some of my participants' shared sense of solitary existence is in how they experience their aging lives, psychological and emotional isolation, where they have no trusted others to talk to about their aging concerns. This solitary subjective experience is influenced by the institutionalized heteronormative mechanisms laid out to queer orientations, lack of legislative recognition and protections for LGBTQ plus people in relationships, no legal recognition of same-sex civil marriage or unions, cis-heteropatriarchal Philippine family code, absence of queer social support programs in communities or health systems, conservative Christian ideologies reinforcing gender norms, and or health system structures that render LGBTQ plus aging needs invisible. This also directly implicates the lived experience of precarity of aging and aging futures. Precarious aging and aging futures are characterized by my participants' consistent sense of uncertainty over their quality of aging life. They have also articulated affective particularities that point to fears and worries about their aging futures. Given their solitary context and intersecting burdens, fears of neglect, abandonment, and abuse are salient in their aging lives. My participants also live through a reorientating of queer subjectivities. This is characterized by how queerness is subjectively experienced in the past compared to the present as an older queer person. The lived experience of queer subjectivity changes their positionality of being a young person, a young queer person, to becoming or being an aging queer individual. This theme describes the orientation and or reorientation of personal consciousness in experiencing the queer subjective self through reflections about their queer identity from their temporal and contextual situatedness. A reorientating of queer subjectivities underscore an awareness of their aging queer sexualities, diminish self-perceived attractiveness, and valuating their queer subjectivity through spirituality. While meaning-making, Audre Lorde said, meaning-making becomes a revelatory distillation of experience. This meaning-making elevate subjective experiences of queer aging to critical heights of understanding the common human condition of aging. Stories of queer reflexivity become tracks that help us trace the meanings born of lives experienced by queer people. My participants' accounts reveal the emerging theme of intentionality of purpose and resilience. They describe that aging means the intentionality of purpose driven to achievement and resilience as life and aging outcomes. They traverse through life with the intentionality to survive, an intentionality of existence. This intentional purposeful navigation is a function of resistance and claim the intention to live and be alive amidst the oppressive powers subjugating their queer sexualities. Their meaning-making also reveal the theme eminence of being burden. Aging beingness is a consideration of the burden for another to be folded into the experience of aging. The sense of dependence on another, the sense of sharing the limited resources, an eminent and subjective understanding of being as a burden to others. And finally, their meaning-making showed queer survivor pride. It highlights their ability to reach older age despite facing a lifetime of challenges shaped by patriarchy, heteronormativity, homophobia, stigma, violence, and sexual exploitation. Self-reliance, resilience, and embracing their queer authenticity in a society that marginalizes them are key aspects of their queer survivor pride. My participants take pride in overcoming crisis and in the competencies they have developed as they continue to navigate life and aging. Today, I bared but a feature of my project on the critical phenomenology of aging in older queer Filipinos. I invite you to sit with these stories and insights as a queer person, as a straight person, as an academic, as a young student, as an aging individual, as a human being forging and aiming for a livable life. From my participants' stories of queer reflexivity throughout their entire life course, they revealed its internal and relational complexities. Stories of queer reflexivity relative to their accounts of accommodation and dissension rejection bring to light insights about their identity from confusion, interrogation, and a sense-making to a realignment or transformation. Queer reflexivity commences as a relational outcome that cues the queer self's otherness within that inhabited sociocultural context. Andrew Blakey succinctly describes, identities are constituted less by what people are than by what they are not. It is in knowing the difference between ourselves and others that we understand what makes us distinctive. It is in relating to one's external world that one begins the continuous process of reflecting on sameness, difference, connectedness, disconnectedness, belongingness, otherness. Queer self-awareness of difference that can begin within childhood will continue and persist throughout a queer person's life course, reflexively present as they navigate, negotiate, and interact within a heteronormative environment. This is described as a queer self-policing of reflexive selves that is present throughout the life course. Queer reflexivity encompasses identity development, coming out to self, or the queer acceptance narrative. I offer this as a nuanced perspective in expanding conversations and inquiries into queer identities and subjectivities. My participants' stories help in contextualizing and acknowledging that queer reflexivity is an overarching storyline that is integral to positioning queer subjectivities across relational forces throughout their life course. Queer reflexivity as an overarching storyline underscores the pervasiveness and force of heterosexism throughout the entire life course. Reflecting on one's difference is a profound consequence of sexual identity stigma and systemic discrimination and prejudice against queer identities. I leave you with this invitation. I feel it is important to honor and acknowledge that in my inquiry into Filipino queer aging, I have always kept my participants close to my heart, my methodological decisions, writing, and critical positionality. After my data gathering phase in April 2023, and since then I have lost participants, Mimi, during the later part of 2023, and in 2024, I was informed by his family that JR passed away. I have also lost Spinmeister in 2024. Since December of 2023, I have been unable to locate one participant. I have spent months trying to find out his whereabouts, and I have continued to do so to the present day. I have at least 3 participants who are chronically ill, Nong, B, and Jonah. This is my reality. This is the ineluctable path I tread. The challenges I figure into the final stages of my project were time and resilience for me and my participants. Time was of the essence where I, as a queer researcher, keep conscious time and pace of my progress, while time is narrowing for my participants who are aging and some being unwell. Resilience is tested here, where I, as a primary methodological tool, who was in this inquiry wanted to see its completion, could only persevere despite my bouts of anxiety, emotional labor, self-doubts, and losing my participants in the process. Whilst for my participants, resilience is their life force, to live into their aging years with dignity, security, and a livable life. This is not a meaningless space and moment. This space will never be meaningless nor silent. This space breathes aging queer lives. I say their names in their honor: Nong, Jonah, Matthew, Jules, Petimony, JR, A, Pinky, Spinmeister, Mimi, B, and It. This very moment is also to honor whom I have lost. Their stories will keep them alive here. Kapun ka.
Thank you, Monique. Very powerful. I think what you talked about resilience really rings a bell, like across the age spectrum. You know, like some research that we have conducted together as well. We can also see the importance of that in the younger LGBTIQ populations. Well, much of what you described also rings a bell and sounds kind of familiar in Thailand, but let's hear it from a second presenter, Associate Professor Tikana Satarakun, who will talk about the experiences of the participants and also well-being intervention among older adults with diverse ODSC in Thailand. Okay, Florida.
Okay, thank you for your meaningful story, and I think it related to my research too. Okay, good morning everyone, and today I would like to share our study. Is the slide? Okay. Okay. My study and experience and well-being intervention among older adults with diverse SOGI. Can I call diverse SOGI? Okay. And before we get started, let me quickly introduce our team. Okay. Ajahn Akala, he is in our research team too. and Ajahn Narut. Okay. So uh, this this project we consist of two main phases. Next. The first phase focused on a situational study that examines the current condition and baseline information related to diverse socio older adults. And then after that, based on this finding of this phase, we start to the second phase to develop development of friendly space for diverse socio older adults. Okay. Let me start with first phase, a situational study of sexual well-being, mental health, and relationship among diverse socio older adults in Thailand. In this study, we use the term diversity instead of LGBTIQ+ because I avoid to leave out some letter or for more inclusively when used. And the project actually started about 3 years ago when we noticed that diverse socio older adults in Thailand are still a group we know very little about. And especially when it comes to basic data for policy maker when policy make or can use it. At the same time, there's a common belief that the diverse socio older adult and general older adult have the same needs in the society. So that's why I study this project. In this study, we use both quantitative and qualitative. Yeah. For this quantitative data, we start with the data with demographic of diversity, limited age, and older adults. Oh, so okay, ต้องกด okay, sorry. Okay. This table gives an overview of who our participants are grouped by sexual identity. On average, all the participants are around 60 years old. And our total sample includes 189 people, which may seem small, but reaching diverse socio older adults in Thailand very hard. Yeah. So many have experienced stigma and discrimination in the past, and some may not feel comfortable disclose their identity. Okay. And this table, we also try to include participants from different area and region and different identity, L, lesbian, G, gay, bisexual, and transgender, and other. Okay. This picture is show about gender and sexual identity as described by participants classified by age and sex assigned at birth. Age and sex assigned at birth both affect health and health-related behavior in later life, so it's important to look at these factors together when we talk about diversity older adult too. It shows clear two patterns. The left side is the sex assigned at birth as male, and the right side shows sex assigned at birth as female. And we found that the participants who were assigned as female at birth were more likely to identify as trans than those assigned male at birth. And the second, look at the head as the people in 15 to 59 years old group move into older age over the next 10 years. We are likely to see noticeable increase in the number of gay and lesbian older adults too. Okay, next. This past, I will sharing the result of comparing well-being between diverse socio older adult and general older adult population. Okay. This table compares current relationship and living arrangement between diverse socio older adult from our study and general older adult based on data from the National Survey of Older Population Thailand. So in the first column of our project data. And the second column is from the National Survey. What we can see in that among diverse socially older adults, fewer people have a partner. This slide. And that we see that at the same time, living alone more than twice with the general older adult. Next. And this table shows the working status and primary source of income. Okay. The study found that diverse socially older adults are much more likely to still be working, even they 60 years old and above. That I think it's interesting that primary source income that from work too, not children like general older adults. Yes. And this shows the financial status. The study found in the first group, diverse society have more saving than the general older adult because it's related to the previous data too that they're still working, even 16 years old. And the next. This table shows the health-related behavior. It's interesting finding is diverse socially older adults are more likely than general older adults to smoke regularly, drink alcohol regularly, and drug use regularly. That relate the health behavior. And next. Oh, sorry. And the table that the happiness score is not different, but that found is the lowest group is more than the general. Yeah. And next. Okay. Next. When it comes to mental health score from Thai generic mental health assessment, we found the score of the diverse socially older adult is not different from the general population. And next slide. Okay. In this study, we also collect data from sexual research. This because in Thai society, there is a common assumption that sexual research is only for young people, and that older adults should no longer be concerned with it in Thai culture. Yeah. As a result, sexual well-being among older adults is often overlooked. Our findings show that nearly half of participants still experience in the sexual research. The most common is they respond to sex research in the mostly masturbation, then sex with partner, and about 80% need for sexual satisfaction. Next. This we compare when they use the health service, physical, mental health, and sexual health. Okay. It's interesting from this data, it show that when they were socially older adults experience physical symptoms that require care, most of them actually choose to seek healthcare service. But when it comes to mental health and sexual health, the pattern look different. Among those who have symptoms, the number of people who seek care on this who do not quite similar, very small. And next, This chart shows perceived discrimination in sexual health service. Among participants who report having experienced discrimination, the most common experience were feeling unsafe or uncomfortable with service facilities, such as changing room, X-ray room, or restroom, and feeling anxious when accessing sexual health service. Next, this part focus on experience of discrimination related to diversity. We look at discrimination across different areas of life: education, employment, housing, finance, health and insurance, public service, and social. And yes, when we look at the finding of experience of discrimination among diversity older adults, the percentage may not seem very high. However, this number should ideally be very close to zero or not exist at all. Overall, participants report that work-related discrimination was the most common. This includes experience of physical, sexual, and verbal violence, as well as bullying and harassment in the workplace, reported by 10%. In addition, 9% said they have experienced discrimination during job applications. Okay. And next is other dimension: housing, finance, that's not much more. Health and insurance, public service, social have a little percentage. This slide shows when we see at the impact of past discrimination, about half of participants think it have an impact, but some impact about 40% and high impact about 5%. So that means it have an impact in their life. Okay, and next table, this slide show when we use the chi-square test of association between experience of discrimination and gender identity. At the column is the gender identity: lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, and other. And at the low is the experience of discrimination. And this table we show only the significant statistically. We found that transgender participant report the highest level of discrimination in almost all areas: employment, and overall, and social. But the public service is shown in the other. And the next table, when we compare this, when we chi-square test of association between experience of discrimination and area of residence, it's quite interesting. There's a common assumption that people in the Bangkok metropolitan area are more aware of and accepting of diversity than those in other provinces. However, our findings show that participants live in the Bangkok area actually report higher level of discrimination score across all dimensions too. Okay, this is from the quantitative data, and the next is for the qualitative data that I collect about 15 participants, and actually it relates to your work that I have output in the book and ebook that consist of 15 stories of them too. Okay, the next, the Ajahn.
Okay, as Professor Titikan mentioned about how our project collect stories from about 15 participants, which are diverse, older adults. And I think our findings are quite, emphasize what Professor Monique mentioned, how stories really important when it comes to uh, empower or make people understand the experience of queer individuals. And I think at the beginning of our project, we talked about how we could understand their experience more because we were in younger generations, and we realized that some aspect might be something that we had never had experiences before. So we agreed that stories would be the most beneficial sources of information that we can retrieve. So, is that like, in this project for our qualitative study, we use narrative approach and thematic analysis. We focus on context of cultures and of time because we interview Thai people. That means we have to use cultural context for the analysis, but at the same time, we have to see the stories from their perspective. For people who were born before us, which in the past the society were quite different from what we have right now. And even though nowadays we still experience some cultural aspects like the concept of karma or the gratefulness that children have to give back to their parents. But I think in the past, based on the stories that we listened to, these influences were much more stronger. And I think that that also shaped the way that our participants identify themselves and see the world and understood the concept, the rights-related attitudes. And after we collected data from them, when we used thematic analysis, we categorized them based on the sex assigned at birth. But we recognize that, their identities are much more complex than that. But we see some similarities of how the society shaped them based on the sex assigned at birth. So we will start from the first group. For the assigned female at birth, I think it's quite similar to many countries in Southeast Asia or around the world that female homosexuality and transgenderism from female to male were less recognized by the society because the society is male dominant. So in Thailand, in the past, we were lack of understanding about female homosexuality when compared to male homosexuality. And similar to what Professor Monique mentioned, that most relationships among this group of participants were assumed to be friends. And it was easier for this group of participants to become invisible. On the bright side, they experience less discriminations based on their sexuality because, the male dominant society overlook their sexuality. But when it comes to that gender, because of being assigned female at birth, they were target of different types of discrimination like sexual violence. It is quite shocking and sad at the same time that regardless of how they identify themselves, participants in this group have mentioned their experience of being sexually abused by men or being target of a concept of fixing their sexuality. Like, this woman love the same sex, so if she was done something sexually by men, they will change, which was quite common back then. It's still common now, but it became less. And because of the past, the only way that women can access resources is through marriage with men. So this also affect financial security, and many women were forced by their family to, to marry with men, which also affect the security of relationships. Another aspect that I think it is quite interesting is the fluidity of gender among this, this group of participants. And I think it's also show that westernized concept of LGBT categories could not apply to, to the context here because some women identify themselves as Tom or masculine expressing homosexual women, but some of them became trans men and some changed their identity to something else like lesbian or non-binary. So it's too difficult to fix to or categorize them, and we find that fluidity is more common among the first group of participants. Okay, for the second group, assigned male at birth, when compared, as I said that uh, the patriarchal society in Thailand recognize male homosexuality or transgenderism from male to female more. And so in this group, we also see different types of experience based on their gender identity. One is cisgender gay men, and the other is trans women, which are quite different. For transgender women, since they cannot hide their identity, they quite stood out since they were born. So they became the target of discriminations really early at life. And but due to high visibility, it's what easy for them to form their own communities. So the bond within the community is quite stronger, but they have to stay within limited spaces. And for gay men, because of their cisgender identity, it is easier for them to hide. And based on our interview, we find out that most of them used to meet each other in nightlife business. And in the morning, they have to hide themselves, but after that, they can meet each other at night. And another reason why that they have to hide their identities because during the time when they were in their 20s or 30s is what in the 80s, which was the HIV crisis. And this stigma is quite strong. There are many gay men activists try to increase visibility, but at that time it was much more difficult because like if they had to ask to contact someone that they want to use this location to do a sport, but they want to do sport for just gay men. People were not around because they feel like, is this inappropriate? We will not allow gay men to do sport here because of the stigma. So I think this group of participants, even though they have privilege as male, for cisgender gay men, but due to high stigma, they had to hide their identities. And for transgender women, because of their most visible identity, they became the second class of population really easy, but they have to pursue the career for their own population, mostly in entertainment or cosmetic field. Yeah. So this is the information from the stories that we gathered from 15 participants. So we can conclude that in the past, Thailand was lack of awareness and knowledge about homosexuality, transgenderism. So it also affect how people treated diverse SOGIs, older adults, which cause a lot of trauma or pain, psychological pain in them in the long term. Like many people became isolated because they did not trust the society, which is similar to your findings as well. And because of in the past, they were not prepared in terms of skills, especially transgender women. When they become older, it also affects how it is difficult for them to find career. And we want to emphasize that in this project, we study intersectionality between being diverse SOGIs population and older adults, which Professor Titikan already mentioned that Thai society mostly assume that older adults are cisgender and heterosexual. And to become older, you have to conform to cisgender heteronormativity, like getting married, having children, which contributed to the invisibility of diverse SOGIs population. And at the same time, based on the media, when the media represented diverse SOGIs adults, most of them are young. And this is quite difficult for us to imagine how this group of population will live when they become older. So we want to emphasize that it is very important to recognize that diverse SOGIs adults, older adults, also exist. Yeah. So this is the qualitative part.
Okay, thank you, Ajahn Narut. And the next, so I can skip the policy recommendation, but at the key finding from the first phase that start we to continue to the second phase that I pick up, especially first line and the last line. In the study show that 1 in 3 diverse SOGI at 15 and above live alone. And some participants report feeling of loneliness due to lack of community belonging that show in the result. That's why I start in the second phase. This project too, yeah. And Ajahn North will present it.
Okay, for the second phase, we started like last year, right? Like from February last year, and we continue this phase for like 4 months for the intervention, and then we before the intervention we have some kind of pre-test about mental health and some facets of well-being for the participants, and then it's kind of like an experimental research here. So we started some kind of workshop activities that those diverse SOGIs, older individuals come to participate, and then we try to find whether this kind of intervention can alleviate their mental health and decrease their loneliness. In okay, okay, in this phase we design the workshops based on some kind of theories and concepts surrounding the well-being of older persons and about the minority stress model as well. For the activities here, we started by designing the workshop series. We say it's some kind of series because it's not just one day activity, but we decide the workshop to be continuous for 4 months, and we have some kind of networking activities during the workshop and also after the workshops, and we grant some kind of fundings for our participants to manage their own activities, and some of them have some skills of being facilitators, so some of them initiated other workshops which are appropriate for their network and the people with diverse SOGIs, older individuals, because we are younger generations and the workshops that we decide may be on our own perspectives. So after the workshop finished, we let them manage their own activities. So they can help whatever they think it's important for their age. And we also develop an online platform. We call it the Wellbeing Profile Report System, which is accessible for everyone. And today you can also access this kind of this system as well. No? but it's not finished yet, right? But this system we also use for the collection of the data before and after the workshop to assess the development of the mental health of the participants. So this is the overall series of the workshop. We divided the workshop into 4 phases. The first one, we based on the theories on mental health and well-being development, we started by letting the participants explore their self-identities again and be aware of their emotions and their response to those kinds of emotions. And we also give them some kind of tangible tools for them to observe their own feelings and how they can respond to their feelings. So the first part focus on their self. So, and then we come to the second part on the second month. We focus on connecting themselves with the other persons because we have some findings in the first phase that the older Sojis individuals have some issues with connecting with others, and others are not very ready to connect with them. So we start with the older Sojis individuals first to how they can manage themselves to respond to the conversations that others may have in positive ways or in negative ways to themselves. And then to the third phase, we started to empower those individuals to engage in civic activities, because we found that from the first phase that the older Sojis individuals, some of them have a lot of potential to drive social change. Some of them are hiding in some kind of dark places, but some of them become activists and they are very powerful. So we found that those individuals have those kind of powers. So in this third part, we focus on civic engagement and let them find their values in participating in social service. And then the fourth part of this workshop series, we focus on reflection and learning what they gathered from these 4 phases of the workshop series. And these are some photos of our participants. We have their consent already, you don't need to worry, but these individuals participated. We got them like 28, 27 or 28 individuals in this workshop, and this is like the first day that they come together. And we have some kind of learning tools like cards or some kind of group discussion about their identities and their inner self. Some of them are so much aware of their feelings, but some of them learned a lot of tools to deal with their feelings. Some of them are in positive way and some of them are in negative way, and we give them some tools. And actually our participants themselves share their tools that they used during everyday life, and our participants learn from one another. The second workshop here is still in the part 1. We change our platform into online Zoom program for the participants to to engage in the workshop more easily. For some of them are not in Bangkok, so this online platform provide their opportunities to participate more easily. The third one here and the fourth one here focus on the connection with others. Actually, in this workshop, we didn't just focus on the connection between person and person, but we also go beyond the person boundary into the connection with the environments, to the other kinds of spiritual environment as well. So they find that some of their activities may be connected to others in the society and also to the environment. This is session 5 on the engaging with society workshop. We go to the critical reflection on their relationship with each age group in the society, how older individuals can communicate with the younger generations and also to the adult generation and also to their own older generation as well. So they have some findings during this workshop that communication with some generations are more difficult than the others, and we also let them find some solutions, what kind of conversation can be initiated and how they can connect with the other generations. This is the 6th and 7th workshop. In the last part of the workshop, we come into empowerment phase to let them share. Some of them participated in a lot of social service activities. So some others which may not participate that much can learn from the others, and now we believe that we still have a line group, a messenger group, which they can still share their work, their volunteer work. So the others can join, and also they still make connections after the workshop. Some of them manage to meet in a restaurant or some of their homes. So we believe that these individuals after the workshop still continue the relationship, and also we believe that it also reduces their loneliness and increase their mental health and well-being. These are the activities that the older Sojis individuals participated during the workshop, and also the ones that they organized themselves, which we find that it's so much more lively and so much like friendly than what we created themselves. And I think this is a kind of a success that we created, because we let them find each other and let them create their own workshop themselves. And this is the profile report system, which is online in Thailand now. We collected a lot of information from them. Most of them are on these 4 kinds of well-being: the physical well-being, mental well-being, social well-being, and spiritual well-being. And also we also assess the loneliness level of the participants before and after, and compare whether they change after the workshop, after the intervention. And also the report system here recommend the individuals what they can do or what they can share for the others. Some of them are so strong and so much have a lot of well-being, so they can share their insights to the other persons. So in this report system, we also have some recommendation what they can do to the others, not just what they can do for themselves. These are the findings that we got from the pre-test and post-test comparison. We found that a lot of well-being has been increased. The social well-being, the social well-being may not be increased that much, because there are some like other factors in the society that can affect their social well-being. But we found that their physical well-being, spiritual well-being, and psychological well-being increased significantly after the workshop. And also the loneliness level, so the social loneliness and emotional loneliness decreased dramatically after the workshop. This is the conclusion for the well-being and the loneliness level of the participants. โอเคครับ thank you
I think that was very impressive as well. And thank you, all three of you. So let's give them a good applause. I think especially the intervention part really shows how we can build hope and tangible change in the lives of older adults, whatever their identities and whatever their past trauma. So I think it's time to open the floor for questions and answers, right? And this is both everyone who is here in the room and including you, yes please, and everyone who is online as well. If you're online, you can leave questions in the post where we are live broadcasting this, and we can discuss them here in the room. I've got it open here, so don't worry, we will see it. So, anyone would like to start? And by the way, if you did register and if you do want a certificate, do scan this QR code that's on the screen. So that.
Can I start first? To be honest, I really wanted to ask during your presentation because I was so excited. I mean, during my PhD, I also did research about queerness in Thailand and Japan. So the foundation of the research is queer theories and also post-colonialism. Even though Japan and Thailand was not the colonies, but we still received strong influence from Western countries. And when I am in this faculty and did research project with Professor Titikan and Professor Akala, it was the first time that I include age into my research. And your research also mentioned the intertwining between being Filipino, being queer, and including aging into this formula. So if I'm not wrong, I understood that when you mentioned that there is a privilege of westernized aspect of aging, right? Could you please extend the details on this a little bit more? Because I think this is the first time that I heard how age and Westernness blended together and interact together in the field of queer studies.
I think that is a very warranted question because when people ask me why I study what I study, is simply I respond because I haven't seen any literature that talks about this intersectionality, particularly for the global South people and positionality and situation, especially more so for the global South who were colonized by Spain for over 333 years, which of course they left us with wonderful paradigms and ideologies of Catholicism and very traditional and conservative views of sexuality and gender. And this is where I particularly focus on in terms of the social structures that are forces of power that continue to oppress sexual minorities like myself. I acknowledge my privilege because I am an academic and a researcher, and at the same time I teach in a university that is very progressive in terms of ideologies and theories. So I have that privilege of speaking to you today, but in other institutions in the university in the Philippines, it might not be as welcome, or I have to over-explain myself. So Yes, particularly in the literature of aging, it's very weird. It's very Western, and if you add a layer of queerness to it, queer aging in of itself, there's very little literature. Um, in Japan, I think there's very, if not few, just handful, and indirectly talking about queer aging. In the Philippines, I can only count five, six if I'm included. In the past, what, 20 years? If you compare that to Western literature, they have leaps and bounds of aging, um, queer aging studies in particular, and they have expanded their methodologies, and they have used their studies to inform legislation and governance. Hence, their progress and development when it comes to um, queer rights and protections. Unfortunately for us in the global south, I speak for the Philippines, it's still a long way. Our SOGI equality bill is 22 years and so it's not yet approved. That's why I do what I do, because apart from thinking about it from I acknowledge that using the queer lens is also alluding to a very colonial mindset. But then, if think about Audre Lorde's notion about using the master's tools to disentangle and dismantle the master's house, I will use my privilege as a queer academic and activist to unpack what the Western colonization have brought upon us in terms of structures of oppression and forces of oppression, particularly for sexual minorities like myself. And I commend your work because this is something very beautiful and it warms my heart. And I wish only for the Philippines that this kind of intervention is helped for sexual minorities, like older sexual minorities in the Philippines. Number one, it's so difficult to find them. I don't know how you did your sampling, but it's so difficult to find them. Most of the studies that have been done about queer aging is focused in the capital, in Metro Manila, in the northern part of the Philippines. But my area of study was in the locality at the heart of the Philippines. And it's so difficult to find them. There is still a lot of structures to go through in order to find the right people. And I chose participants that are not in urban areas. So they're more in the towns and outside the city. So yes, I hope I answered your question.
I also think that when you gave your answer, it also reminded me how stories that both of your project and our project use is very important, because in Thailand I think there is a myth that diversity is a foreign topic, it is a Western topic, and when we presented that diversity populations have lived in Thailand for a long time, so it is not a new topic. It's not just for the Gen Z topic. It have been discussed for since baby boomers or before that. So I think we walk on the right track, that we included stories to present what people ignore. And you want to share how we recruit?
Yes, it's very hard. Okay, it's very hard to recruit the participant, and at the first phase, it's the first time of I went in the LGBT area, because I'm from the aging and older adult area, my field. Uh, and in the quantitative research, we find them from various way and methodology. We contact more various organizations that work on LGBT, and we public to anyone who have the friend or family in LGBT, and we recruit them to be a researcher, and we train them as a researcher to collect the data too. Yeah, that's why, but it's not so much for in the quantitative.
I agree. It's not straightforward. No pun intended. Um, it's the recruitment for older LGBTQ plus people are not is not easy. They have lived their lives hiding and or if not hiding, trying to mute their queerness or invisibilize their sexualities, and it's rightfully so. They have experienced so much trauma and oppression, and they have lived through life normalizing this, and they have gotten used to it. And oftentimes there are trust issues. So apart from the tricky part here is that although I'm also part of the queer community, it's not my ticket into their community because I'm younger than my respondents or participants. So the trust also, intergenerational trust, needs to be established. That's why I'm fascinated with your intervention because you get to merge in generations across ages, and this is really what helps older LGBTQ plus people to appreciate the importance of bridging their lives across age groups. But it takes time because they need also to ease into trusting others to take them into their world.
Hi, thanks. Very insightful work you guys are doing. I'm just curious to know, I'm not sure if I picked it up, but that in the aging queer community, there's a loss of information. They tend to not be on trend, on par with current developments. So I'm curious to know, I mean, 20 years back, we didn't have all the rainbow, there was just LGBT, right? And so how did you pick that up in your work? And so I have a lot of inter interactions with older queer folk, and it's difficult to have a current conversation with them because they're just not. I think I saw on one of the slides that there was this strong idea that being gay is wanting to be a female, right? And so that sort of has transformed over the years, and yeah, it's just fascinating to see. And I wanted to also say geriatric services is a global issue, public health concern in itself, and not only, you know, queer aging and health in aging. And I'm just curious to know what are suggestions and how we improve, especially primary health care, right, for our aging queer community. What has happened in Thailand? What has happened in the Philippines? Because in South Africa, where I'm from, we struggle. We don't even have these services generally for older people. Also in terms of aging, I'm also working on a project with dementia, and I'm really, because gender and sexuality is a biomarker for dementia, right? Especially as you've mentioned, the minority stress as a result of the, you know, lifelong experiences of stigma and discrimination. So yeah, just your thoughts around that. Thanks.
I think I'll respond to that first. The thing about aging, in particular, I would like to speak from my context in the Philippines. The framework is still very universal. Although it is understandable that aging is a universal human condition, is it? But then universality erases subpopulations. For example, people with disability, other intersectionalities, for example, socioeconomic, religious, well-being, health. There's so many intersections that you can think about when it comes to aging. But because the social welfare system, medical health care systems universalizes the aging experience, it erases these intersections of concerns and issues. Like you said, it's a very how dysfunctional system. It's a very Western way of looking at it. Even more so if in Thailand, especially that their work also emphasized how important culture is. How has this been incorporated into the medical health system and social welfare systems? These are things that we need to talk about, and we need to engage with those in authority who decides to make these changes. As much as I can proclaim that we do research in aging, we're only just scraping the surface because we can only do so much. Because people who move mountains to help other people live better lives, particularly those who are minoritized, marginalized, and invisibilized, you need to really find the right connections in government and funding and people who can lobby with you. Hence, at the end point, we need to think about how aging, although universal, it's still very contextual, very, very much contextual. And this is oftentimes drowned out in many conversations, particularly in medical discourse, that aging is, we're all aging, but then we don't age the same way. We don't experience aging the same way. As much as my aging is not the same as that of my participants, who are considerably indigent individuals in the subpopulations, who are far from hospitals, who do not live with their own families, who live alone, who have lost partners. We can talk about this all day long, about how different and contextual the aging experience is. And this is, I suppose, what we do, because people forget that aging is different for every individual.
Timo, you can also help adding in terms of healthcare or welfare if you have some information in Thailand. It's not my expertise field. But I think in Thailand we also have different types of identities that in the intersectionality, similar to what Professor Monique mentioned, what happened in the Philippines. We recognize that our 15 participants cannot represent the whole populations of diverse origins in older adults in Thailand. And we also realize that when it comes to socioeconomic status, it also affects a lot when it comes to their well-being, their healthcare, and also affect how they identify themselves and choose to access certain services. Like in the past, Thailand, the concept of transgenderism, especially from female to male, was not much recognized in the past. So for people of the current time of the present, only a few of them will have access to newer knowledge. They feel like they have the right to to have transition. And if they have more knowledge and have more resources, they have better hormone therapy, have better institution to do the surgery for them, which so many older adults could not have access to that. And Thailand still has some problem when it comes to distribution of resources. But I think when compared to many countries, our healthcare is healthcare ดีกว่าใช่ปะค่อนข้างแบบโอเค the healthcare of other people in Thailand is fine for everyone, regardless of their sexual or gender identities. But in other aspects, we still have a lot of problems.
Maybe I can expand a little bit. So I think what you were referring to is maybe the fact that Thailand has universal coverage of healthcare for all citizens, although it's a tale of many tears, shall we say, because the healthcare that the civil servants get is usually better funded, and there's more options. But in principle, if you're a Thai citizen, you will be guaranteed healthcare, from cradle to grave. But I think there's also another intersectional. As another foreigner in Thailand, I can reflect. I mean, I can relate to this. I mean, for example, I get healthcare through my work, but if I no longer work, I'm no longer entitled to it in the same sense. So I can only imagine how difficult it must be if you're not a Thai citizen and you are no longer able to work and you're foreign. Whatever your nationality, that can come with a lot of issues. I think that's one thing.
And another problem when it comes to medical service, and because I also taking care of another project about same-sex marriage and related laws. Most people in the field of medical mention how medical staff still lack of knowledge about gender and sexual diversities. So when they are in the position to protect the rights of diversity population, when they have no awareness or knowledge, they do not do that. Like when same-sex couple, one side is in coma, and we already have same-sex marriage law, which is the partner have the right to make a decision. But if the medical staff has no knowledge, they will not push for the partner to use this right, and they will go straight to the parents of the patient instead, which is still we are in still the progress and in the process to improve this condition as well.
We also have a question on the chat from online, so let me read it. So this is from Win Ponwasin, who says, Sawadee krap from Indonesia. I have several questions in mind. What sort of efforts that the educational institutions have implemented to create inclusive learning environments, and what can be improved? And number two is, my transgender and queer people, I think this referring specifically to people who identify as queer, dominantly be discriminated as society's lack of complete or in-depth understanding about them, and the trend of LGBT independence from transgender and queer groups. Khop krap. So this is a question from Kun Win, and I think this is for any four of you. Feel free to answer.
Thank you for that question. In terms of inclusive or incorporating LGBTQ plus issues in the educational system, as far as my university is concerned, we are quite progressive. We incorporate them. We are mandated to talk about, we have what we call gender mainstreaming. Actually, it's mandated by law, but I'm not sure with other universities. In some big universities, they do incorporate it. I personally teach LGBT psychology back home for undergraduates. We welcome LGBTQ plus research very much, and we support them. In terms of how it is in the basic education, though, that is something that is really quite contentious, because although we do have a sex education bill, if I'm not mistaken, the implementation part is still lacking because competencies for teachers, because of the sex and sexuality taboo, the difficulty of talking about these things in the classroom is still a very profound entity that we have to contend with. And on the second bit about how trans and queer people are quite divergent from the L, the G, and the B community, that is very correct in terms of realities. We must admit that within the community, we also have our own schisms, and like any other community, I suppose. And we are not, there are even some in the community who may not be for same sex marriage or may not be for progressive methods and measures to help alleviate our living conditions or our lives. But we do acknowledge that these diverse perspectives, particularly for trans people, is well warranted. Why? Because they do have a different lived experience. Being trans is profoundly different from that of being lesbian, bisexual, or gay man, particularly. So even so that these things exist, the fundamental issue here is how we make, regardless of sexuality, gender, or whatever your orientation would be, the minimum contention or the minimum issue here is to have equal rights, livable life, to have access to medical care, aging care, recognition in terms of partners and relationships. That's the fundamental issue that we need to make sure, because well-being, you know that in your studies, is made up of many facets, from relationships to personal health, to spiritual health. And these are things that we need to discuss with those who are in structural powers that make decisions for our health and for our lives. And most especially for trans people who are, like in your study, is very visible. I call them the bravest subpopulation because they are the most authentic, and they open themselves up to the public for, because they're particularly for trans women. And we know that statistics show, regardless of whichever part of the world you are in, they are the highest in terms of suicidality, they are highest in terms of homelessness, and they are the highest in terms of sexual violence. So yes, indeed, it is very warranted to have a different set of framework or understanding and appreciation for the lives lived by trans people as opposed to other gender diverse communities.
In the case of Thailand, I will discuss the second question first, and maybe the first question other can help me. Yeah. I think in Thailand, when it comes to the discrimination against transgender and non-binary people, I think even nowadays that when the popularity of boys' love in Thailand is increased, it still emphasizes the fact that cisgender people have more presentation. And so I assume that in the future, maybe if the business sector or media give a chance to transgender people to voice their stories, to express themselves a little bit more and make people familiar with how transgender people have experience in Thailand, beyond just discrimination or being the clown, being funny or being weird, whatever. I think when people are familiar that okay, transgender people are not different from us, they are like us, I think it will help increase awareness and familiarity with this group of population more. I think based on what I have seen about boys' love, in the past, same-sex relationship between men was a taboo in terms of showing in public, but now it's more common. Yeah, so I think we might apply the same strategy to help support the visibility of transgender people beside the stereotypical representation on the media.
Okay. To answer the first question about the participation of the education institutions, in case of our faculty here, because just like Ajahn Thitikan has mentioned before, and Ajahn Adison mentioned that our faculty do not focus only on the schools and universities, but we also work on the learning of the society. So in a lot of projects on diverse socialist people, we divide the target groups into different groups, and for working on the public learning, we created a lot of media, like writings, and also a lot of video clips that promotes inclusive society, as well as in this research project that Ajahn Thitikan and Ajahn Narut has done here. We created a lot of video clips that tells about the story of those diverse socialist people. We allow those different alphabets, people with different alphabets, to to say about what challenges they are facing differently, just like what Ajahn Narut has presented. So the society can understand what kind of challenges lesbians have been facing, what kind of challenges are different for the gay communities or the transgender community, and also they talk about their relationship with others, and also how difficult they have to face when they try to communicate with other people, and also how difficult they are to find partners in their life as well for the older socialist individuals. So I think this kind of media can expand the understanding of the society. But I know that only just like 4 or 5 clips are not enough for the society to understand. So I think we need a lot more for the education for the society. So and now the clips that we created are online, but the viewers, we have to confess that the viewers may be in only our echo chamber, because the other people which are not interested, they will never understand, and they may never be interested to look into the content in those kind of media. So we will also work in our faculty here. Every curriculum, every courses, every programs here have some subjects that focus mainly on the diverse socialist individuals, like Ajahn Timo and Ajahn Narut also are the main lecturers here on the diverse socialists. So every courses in the bachelor's degree, master's, and also in PhD have some courses that focus on these diverse socialist contents. So we believe that our students in every level, and also our faculty have some out university work. We in the late of May or in June, we have some Bangkok Pride Parade here in Thailand, and our faculty, I think we are the only faculty in Thammasat University that participated in like 3 or 4 years now, and we also allow the students from the Sathit Thammasat Secondary School to also participate with our faculty members, and we encourage our students, and we show our students that we support this kind of activities, and our students can participate without any payment. So, and we have some kind of like labels or some kind of message that we also let our students hold those messages so that when we have these kind of parades, the messages are uh, are seen by the photographing of the public media. So only walking is not enough. So we have some kind of messages that we want to convey every year. Yep.
And I want to briefly add that at our faculty, I think it is quite very important to include everyone into the discussion about gender and sexuality. Like in the class that we have to teach about feminism, we always invite men into the discussion as well, because to make change when it comes to gender equality, we require both female and male to participate. And when it comes to gender and sexual diversity, everyone can talk about this. And the first time that I teach at this faculty, I think we at that time we did not have strong culture when it comes to gender and sexual diversity. When we discussed this topic, cisgender heterosexual male students feel like, oh, this is not my part. This is not my topic. But after that, when we try to make this a common ritual at our faculty, everyone can talk about this. And this help our faculty to form a very inclusive environment. I mean, inclusive, like everybody can talk about this. So I think that is something that's very important. Yeah.
Just a little and briefly, I think it's not only about the sexual dimension, it's just the human rights. And in the action of our faculty in the classroom, we show that we're respectful for everyone, everybody, and that to relate when interaction with others. In Thammasat, we don't have uniform, something like that. That one issue that you explore your identity, something like that.
Okay. คุณวิน Salamat po and ขอบคุณมากๆครับ I strongly agree and support the movement's ideas. Props to everyone. May we have the chance to collaborate to support them. Okay. Just if I may add a little bit on the educational side. So just on the policy level, Thammasat in general has, we have an anti-discrimination policy, right? We have an anti-sexual harassment policy. The students can, when the students are required to wear a uniform, they can choose which kind of uniform. And especially at the faculty, we also have our unisex all-gender toilets. So these are some of the practical things that educational institutions may choose to do. No. Yeah, please.
There we go. I'm curious to know, you say it is well integrated into your faculty. In order to get everybody to buy into it, what were the processes in place? I'm asking this, I'm from South Africa. We were one of the first constitutions globally to make provisions, and yet LGBTIQ plus people still fear their lives, which means that policy does not necessarily translate into attitudinal changes. I'm really interested to know what were those things you were doing in order to make it fashionable to talk about, to maintain that momentum.
It's quite difficult to give the exact answer. I mean, I recognize that this is a big problem. I will say that in terms of ideal, which might not work all the time in practice, I feel like policy will not take action without humans. Yes. So if policy is just a piece of paper, but if people do not have that attitude, like they have inclusive attitude, they will want to change the policy because that policy will not work. But nowadays, that policy works because people still have discriminating attitude toward gender and sexual minority. So I think change should happen from the grassroots and not from the policy. Because when people change, I think we will want to change the policy later. But it will take time and a lot of effort, a lot of patience, because many people still have that kind of attitude, and we cannot force them to change until they want to change by themselves by seeing that, oh, it is better that we have a more friendly society. Yeah.
I would like to add to that quickly. I know that policy sometimes just looks good on paper, right? But I think it is important to also find the right champions to make that paper into reality. There are a lot of people who might be skeptical about joining into the advocacy and activism, but that's where the meaning of purpose of being, I suppose, in academia or in the health system or wherever you are. So important. Apart from that, you were asking practical bits about how this becomes a reality. I think it's also important to empower the right people to ensure that the right competencies to deliver these things. You can't just hire, for example, you have to train faculty. You need to educate them. You need to have them engage in research for them to really live queer lives. So I would always say that I'm a walking marketing ploy for queerness, because everything I do is about my advocacy work and about my research. So this translates to everything I do and everything, the way I live my life. And that's exactly how, I suppose, what Professor said earlier, their policy is just an empty paper if you don't have people. And with people, you need to find the right people who have power. So it might be kind of off-putting, but to work in a society to make sure that you want to get what you need, you will get what you need. You need to find your place where there's power so that you can execute this. So whichever institution you might be in, those are the practical things that you need to do, I suppose.
Maybe if I give just a couple of examples of things that we use to engage cisgender male students, cisgender heterosexual male students to be particular. When we talk about health, we can point out how hegemonic masculine gender norms lead them to die several years younger than women, and how those same kind of gender roles lead them to have much lower grades than women, or indeed, in the Thai case, gay men, for example. So these are some of the things that are food for thought on how, patriarchy doesn't just oppress women or sexual gender minorities, but it also oppresses men. So I think sort of pointing this out is also important. Do we have any other questions or comments, either here in the room or online? Go ahead.
Sorry, could I reply to the last conversation too? Because I have done work with both students in Thailand and in South Africa. So I'm able to provide some comparative context, I would say. First thing, I made some notes, sorry. First thing, I would say that Thammasat University is a very good test case. It is by far the most progressive in Thailand. So keep that in mind. I've also spoken to students in South Africa who come from equally as progressive institutions. So there are definitely some things you can learn locally about how to implement it, but there are differences in resources and how those resources are used, right? And then culturally overall, I would say Thailand is very different. There's a larger culture of tolerance towards difference. So it's a bit easier to advocate for certain things than it would be in other contexts. But I would say university context sometimes matters a bit more. So there are a lot of things you can take from here, but there's also certain things already being done in South Africa. I would say perhaps comparatively, there are more institutions I've seen in South Africa with certain policies than in Thailand. So I would say take that for whatever it's worth. Thank you.
So maybe also just to offer some on the question I asked. So also important to create scholarship around these issues. So there's demand for research. Also creating platforms where good practices can be shared, right? So that others can learn and say, wow, okay, let me try that out. And so yeah, I think it's possible, but also I'm also curious to know about campus climate surveys. What is the general campus climate around gender and sexuality diversity? Is there a need in Thailand to move towards that? Sort of to, gauge a general feeling in higher education around these particular issues. But yeah, good work. Thanks. Keep it up.
I think, have we finished the end of the discussion? Okay, so thank you very much to all our presenters and people who participated and asked good questions and gave some helpful answers. We will have a photo shoot here, and then those of us present here can have lunch. So thank you very much, everyone.